Outside of Call of Duty and various sports titles such as FIFA or EAFC as it's known nowadays, there were very little series that were as consistent as Ratchet and Clank throughout the noughties all the way up until 2013. With a release almost every year during this time, was it ever really possible for this series to release a quality game with every release? Well, outside of the not so great spin offs, they actually kind of did. I'm not trying to say every mainline title in this series is a perfect game. I have 100%ed almost every mainline title a minimum of 10 times each, with the only one that I haven't being Rift Apart, which is probably more like 5 times, to be fair. That game did only release back in 2021, so cut a beard some slack. Alongside my Spyro series, I will be taking you on a journey through all 10 of these mainline Ratchet titles and sharing my thoughts on why I think all of these games are excellent in their own right, even with some rather significant flaws along the way. And as always, where else would we start but at the beginning, with not only my personal favourite game in this franchise, but also my personal favourite game of all time. A game that has been burned onto my heart ever since I first played it alongside my dad over 20 years ago, Ratchet and Clank from 2002. So without further ado, welcome yourselves back to the Bearded Review, where we rank, review, and give opinions on all things when it comes to gaming. The opening to Ratchet and Clank is one of the most unique I have seen throughout my many years of playing video games. We're introduced to Ratchet building a ship, but he's disappointed when he doesn't have the final part. We then cut to Clank being created, seeing the villain's evil plan, and escaping, then subsequently crashing on Ratchet's planet before our tutorial level kicks off with Ratchet wanting to investigate the crash site. After battling our way through some toads and robots with the bomb glove and trusty wrench, we pick up Clank and bring him back to our garage. Home. I'm assuming Ratchet lives here. Anyway, it doesn't matter, as Clank's about to wake up. Now, you may be thinking, what part of this is truly unique? Many a buddy platformer have an opening akin to this, and I will admit, ultimately, you are correct. But I think there is something really special in the fact that neither protagonist actually speaks throughout the entire opening until the pair are actually side by side. Most platformers at the time, such as Jack and Daxter and Sly Cooper, start out with a group or pair that are already established as close friends, but with Ratchet and Clank, it made sense to actually play out a small portion of the game with the player having very little to go on about the main protagonists. Once Clank gives Ratchet a heart attack,
Interesting.
he tells Ratchet that he can act as the final part he needs for his ship as long as Ratchet helps him find the heroic Captain Quark, as he needs Quark's help to stop Chairman Drek, who is our main villain for this first game. Clank shows Ratchet the video on an infobot he saw back in the robot factory where he was born, where Drek details how he intends to destroy planets to take portions of them to build a new home for his race, the Blarg, as their planet has become too toxic to live on. Ratchet agrees to help Clank, and they blast off into space for the first time, with Drek watching from afar. It's such a great yet simple concept. Nowadays, it feels like you need so much more motivation for characters to get an adventure going. Take the 2016 reboot of this exact game, for example. Instead of Ratchet just wanting to leave his planet that he's been stuck on his whole life, he instead wants to leave to become a galactic ranger who like the space police. In the original, my guy simply wants to leave home for the first time, and this little robot is finally giving him the chance to do that. Why would you need anything extra than something that quite literally almost everyone who plays this game can relate to? It's simple, nothing over the top, but still great storytelling considering we're only around 10 minutes into the game, including some gameplay. Anyway, after Ratchet gives Clank a name in the most hilarious way possible,
You got a name? My serial number is V54296. Oops. I'll just call you Clank for short.
we arrive rather stylishly to our first planet, Novalis. Novalis is the planet we saw in the infobot back on Ratchet's home planet that Drek was planning to destroy. And boy, does it not look in good shape. From where we, let's say, landed, we can see burning buildings, ships attacking and bombing from the sky, and troops down below us. But screw all that, as we have a secret route behind us. Now, secret might be a bit of a stretch, as it isn't exactly hidden, it's just not one of the two main routes presented to you. This quote-unquote secret route will introduce you to some of the enemies featured in the level, but more importantly, if you have a keen eye for things that don't quite feel right,
It's just something doesn't seem right.
you'll notice there is something just behind the wall here, and if you were to say, throw a bomb at it, you will discover the first of our collectibles in this game, the gold bolt. These are naturally important for 100%ing the game and are very important for the game's replayability and New Game Plus, which we will discuss a little later in the video. Once you've circled your way back to the crash site, you can get on with the main sections of the level. This game will often feature at least 2 or 3 paths to go down, which usually have one of 3 themes: combat, platforming, or puzzle solving. The latter two are often intertwined and feature little combat, whereas the combat-focused paths will feature some platforming and very occasionally puzzle solving, but other than that, you're just running and gunning. On Novalis, we are first going to focus on the puzzle/platforming section off to the right in this cave here. This introduces you to some very basic platforming where in one section, if you fail, you'll be thrown down some rapids right back to the start of the section. This advances the gameplay rather well without being too threatening. For example, back on Veldin, you wouldn't have been punished at all for failing the 1 or 2 jumps you need to make, and here you won't fall to your death or anything, but you will be forced back to give it all another go. Then, as we will see in upcoming levels and later in the game, you will absolutely be punished by a fall into the deep, dark abyss. As I've already stated in my video on the first game in the Spyro the Dragon series, Insomniac really know how to work their difficulty progression. Once you make your way through these waterworks, you will meet one of the most legendary characters in this series, and in my opinion, in gaming history. However, I am incredibly biased towards these games, so take that with a pinch of salt. This legendary character comes in the form of the plumber, who, in his first humble appearance, is simply looking to get paid so he can escape the planet before Drek destroys it. He offers you an infobot with coordinates to a new planet which you will need to pay for to continue the game. I'm going to get this out of the way here, as this is one of the only genuine gripes I have with this game, as well as its sequel Locked and Loaded, and that is that I heavily dislike the fact that you have to use your currency, which are called bolts in this universe, to advance the game. I don't necessarily hate the concept, as you will quickly realize throughout this video that this game's satire is almost entirely focused on consumerism and how quite literally everyone is trying to make you buy something from them. The issue I have with this in these first 2 games, and most importantly, this game, is that even if you break every box and collect every bolt in every level throughout the entire game, you will not have enough to buy everything there is to buy. Now, outside of these paywalls and a couple of things such as health upgrades, you will almost entirely be using your bolts on new weapons alone. The main issue is that these weapons aren't cheap in this economy, and a good few of them, well, they're just not very good. Take 3 of the first 6 weapons you see in the vendor, being the Glove of Doom, the Taunter, and the Mine Glove. The Glove of Doom is a very cool concept, which is significantly improved upon in later games, but here it's simply worse than the Bomb Glove, which you start with for free. The same can be said for the Mine Glove, which is even worse, as unless you throw these mines directly onto enemies, they will simply sit stationary waiting for an enemy to get close by, or more likely simply sit there until it despawns because you'll just defeat the enemy with another weapon instead. Finally, we have the Taunter, which simply makes funny noises. This quote-unquote weapon is used for a couple of collectibles in the game, but outside of this, it's functionally useless for defeating enemies. And before one of you fuckers says to me, oh, but if you place a mine and then you use the Taunter, you can actually make both of these weapons viable, I simply say that every other way of beating an enemy in the game is more fun than what you just described. So if I were to buy the paywalls, as I have to so I can progress the game, and then I buy these 3 less than effective weapons, I will likely not be able to afford more essential weapons as they become available later in the game, such as the Devastator rocket launcher or Visibomb gun, due to being down 10 or so thousand bolts from buying these less than good weapons, and then I will always be chasing the more effective weapons due to having to constantly buy paywalls so I can play the game. It's one heck of a downward spiral. And do you know what? It's no secret that this is one of the most unpopular things about these first 2 games, because as of the 3rd game, this is all but entirely ditched going forward for the next 20 years. Alright, rant over on paywalls, and now we can move on with Novalis. After paying the plumber for the infobot, it will show you a celebrity in this universe called Skid McMarks and his agent crash landing on planet Iridia, which the infobot gives you coordinates for. However, since Ratchet and Clank are still without transport, we will follow the plumber down the sewer pipe and onto the first combat path of the game, which in all honesty isn't the complete cakewalk you might expect. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's difficult enough for a first time player to die. However, you may well be losing a couple of your 4 hit points along the way due to the sheer amount of these flying dogs and grenade launching robots. After seeing a cool set piece, at least by 2002 standards, where you see a bridge destroyed just as you're about to walk across it, you'll fight through the last few enemies and make your way down to save the planetary chairman from Drek's forces. This is where we start to see some of the big differences in Ratchet and Clank's characters and how they will play off each other for better or worse throughout the game. You see, in this first game, Ratchet is a bit of a badass with an edge to him.
Me out of this thing, you blarg-headed frack monkey! I can barely breathe and my tail feels like it's shoved right up my...
No, not that much edge. We aren't there yet. He's a good guy, but he's willing to be a bit cunning to get what he wants, whereas Clank is a little bit naive and wants to do everything by the book. This is shown in this cutscene when the planetary chairman mistakes Ratchet and Clank for potential bad guys and offers them an infobot in return for not hurting him. Clank goes on to tell the chairman not to be afraid, however Ratchet wants this bot for free, and honestly, considering my rant around paywalls earlier, who can blame him for being a little snide here? In any case, once we have seen the infobot for Al's RoboShack on planet Kerwan, advertised by none other than the main man we're looking for, Captain Quark, the planetary chairman then offers us his courier ship, as we aren't going to torture him. Pretty good deal in my opinion, not gonna lie. Having done everything we can on this world and having acquired a new ship, we can move on to either planet we received infobots for. However, I will always move on to Kerwan first rather than Iridia, as there is a gadget we need to acquire from Kerwan to be able to complete Iridia. And for those of you who don't know from my Spyro videos, your boy the Beard is no fan of backtracking. Before taking you through the level on Kerwan in the city of Metropolis, I want to highlight two phenomenal things about this game. Firstly, how beautiful it is, and secondly, how amazing the music in this game is, and how both of these things work together to achieve whatever feel or atmosphere a given level is going for. In terms of beauty, this game has aged remarkably well. There are a great many titles on the PlayStation 1, 2, and even 3 that when you go back just look plain ugly. And that's okay. Graphics get better, and ultimately, 80% of games simply won't look as enchanting as they did when we were kids. However, and feel free to call me out on my bias towards these games, I just don't think that is the case for this game or most of this series. Every time I load up this first Ratchet game, I am still met with the same vibrant landscapes I found when I was just a young kid. Even the more grim and unsettling levels in the game, such as Talia or Gemlik Base, look phenomenal and absolutely manage to portray themselves exactly how Insomniac wanted them to this very day. Now, I do believe that these levels could be carried by their fantastic graphics alone. However, the music in this game, oh boy, does the music elevate everything to another level. Composer David Bogeaud went above and beyond the Call of Duty when creating the music for this game, as these funky techno beats flood our ears from beginning to end of every level, and pretty much always work with the gameplay and level design to create whatever feeling Insomniac wanted you to feel going into a level. I honestly believe that every level is pretty successful in doing this, but if you want the best examples of graphics and music, you should watch through a level of Gemlik Base, Vitalia, Pokitaru, or Kerwan without my daft mug talking over it. Now, back to the actual game. On Kerwan, you'll need to visit the vendor, as this level unlocks what is, in my opinion, one of the most essential weapons to buy in this game, which is the blaster. I will often also buy the Pyrociter, which becomes available in the previous level, as it's dirt cheap. However, if you're bolt hoarding, please make an exception here, as the blaster is arguably the best all-round weapon in the entire game. Whether you're stationary, running and gunning, fighting small, large, or even airborne enemies, this weapon has all bases covered and is the weapon I will use for the majority of any given playthrough. With the blaster in hand, we are once again given two routes, a choice of left or right. I often choose right, as on this path we get an upgrade for Clank, which makes the path on the left arguably a lot easier. However, you do what you want, because as said previously, I am not your dad. This path to the right is our more combat-focused section of the level, which intertwines some new platforming with the aforementioned Clank upgrade. You see, this pathway leads us to Big Al's RoboShack, which we saw in the infobot on Novalis. Now, Al is a stereotypical nerd.
Nerd.
Thanks for the clarification, Ratchet. Al's nerdiness, however, is only going to help us here, as he offers to give Clank a helipack upgrade for a fee. Because of course it's for a fee. After spending at least a third of your wealth on this upgrade, it will allow you to jump higher and further than you could before, which is not only essential for completing the rest of the game, but also just completing the rest of this pathway as we head out the back of Al's and onto the train station. As we fight through several Blarg and Robo-Dogs, we can pick up another gold bolt with our new helipack moves and jump onto the level's set piece, a moving train. How original, Insomniac. How original indeed. No, I mean that unironically. This is one of the earliest instances of a 3D game using a moving train as a set piece. It likely isn't the first, and certainly isn't the most exciting set piece in the world, but just maybe this helped pave the way for the famous Uncharted 2 train fight years later. I mean, probably not, but who knows? As said, this train ride is a pretty simple affair. Dodge the Blarg's mini missiles and defeat them, and the train will stop very conveniently above your ship at the start of the level. After the train stops, you can find this level's infobot, which will give you the coordinates to another planet being ravaged by Drek's forces, Eudora. The infobot shows a henchman of Drek's being behind schedule in taking the trees from this planet, and Ratchet and Clank decide it's best they go and save the planet and confront the henchman. We can take the lift, or since there is no fall damage, just jump down to the area with the vendor near our ship and head down to the left route from the start of the level, which leads us to a kind of quart and one of the funniest cutscenes in the series' history.
Excuse me, Captain, but we have more pressing issues. We urgently need your assistance.
Clank,
Yes?
do you notice anything unusual about Captain Quark?
Well, I find the fact that he has a spring where his leg should be to be quite puzzling.
And why do you think that is?
Possibly an injury incurred while battling evil?
This isn't the real Captain Quark, you numbskull. It's a robot.
Oh.
Clank might be smart, but he was literally just born yesterday, so we can forgive him for this slight slip-up and take on the Captain Quark fitness course. This fitness course is kind of a more complex platforming tutorial with no enemies, but lots of moving platforms to keep you on your toes. It's a nice little section that doesn't outstay its welcome, only lasting a couple of minutes, and introduces us to everybody's favourite robot personal trainer, Helga. No, I mean it. I'd take Helga over most wannabe Instagram PTs and nutritionists nowadays, no BS, and straight to the point.
Listen up, you loud balls! That was the most pathetic display I have ever seen on that obstacle course!
After she roasts us and makes us pay her for a platforming gadget with the swing shot that we had already earned, we can gather up any collectibles we couldn't when we first arrived here and move on to either Eudora or Iridia. And you guessed it, we need to head to Iridia to be able to use the swing shot to get another gadget which we need to be able to complete Eudora. I don't mean to go back to my hatred of backtracking in games like this, but there is a poor soul out there, likely just a kid, who went to Iridia, did half of that level, then came back to Metropolis to get the swing shot, but also did this entire level getting the coordinates to Eudora, only to go to Eudora instead of back to Iridia, only to find out that they couldn't complete that level either because the route on Iridia where you use the swing shot also gives you the gadget called the Trespasser, which you need to be able to complete Eudora, meaning they will have gone from Novalis to Iridia, then to Metropolis, then to Eudora, then back to Iridia to be able to then go back to Eudora so they can finally continue the game. Screw backtracking, man. That is ridiculous. Wow, over 3,000 words in, 2 rants on backtracking, and we are only now moving on to the 4th level. Go grab a snack or check in with your family, because this video is looking to be a long one. Oh, and of course, leave a like if you're enjoying. Iridia is our second barren, deserty planet, but holy does it look different to Veldin. This planet is dark and honestly just a tad creepy. Perfect balance after 2 more vibrant levels. From the start, we can either head towards the big factory in the distance, or go behind our ship and meet the famous hoverboarder Skid McMarks from the infobot back on Novalis. And you best believe we're heading over to Skid. Now, Skid can offer us no help in our search for Captain Quark, so when he asks for help, Clank, in his own words, gives Skid a swift no, which is pretty based from him considering Skid has just crashed and is completely alone in this desolate landscape. Maybe Clank's the one with the edge. However, Ratchet smells an opportunity and wants to know what he can get out of Skid, and what he can get is a brand new hoverboard for us to use later in the game. So with that, we are tasked with clearing out these ankle-biting enemies known as sand sharks. If you haven't brought the Pyrocita at this point, you may want to consider it, as these enemies were practically made to be killed by a weapon such as this. Once you've cleared out all the sand sharks, Skid will stick to his word and provide you with
Brand new Z3000! You can't even buy these!
With your new hoverboard, you can now jump back down to your ship and continue on to the factory mentioned earlier. Once you reach the factory after clearing out some more sand sharks and robots just trying to make a living, you will find yourself at a split path, one with swing shot targets and another with more factory robots. We're going to head down the swing shot path to further try out our new gadget, and honestly, you can see why this is one of the only gadgets that appears in every title in the series, because it is honestly just so fun to use. The section gets progressively harder, and I use this term loosely as it really isn't a particularly hard section. At the end, you'll reach our next new gadget, which is just floating in the air. And honestly, this is kind of weird, but we don't have to pay for it, and in hindsight, we didn't have to pay for the hoverboard either, so we're two for nothing so far in this level. The trespasser is used for opening doors that we couldn't otherwise open beforehand via these locks in the wall. You have to line these lasers up the right way, and in later levels this becomes more complicated, with several lasers needing to be lined up, objects that block the lasers, and occasionally even having more lasers than needed, so you need to figure out which ones are actually red herrings. You also get some harder trespasser sections which are technically optional, which often will unlock a room with loads of additional bolts or gold bolts. And since we are looking at 100%ing this game, we will certainly be picking them up. Once we base jump from this section, we make our way back down to the fork in the path and head deeper into the factory, taking down more robots and sand sharks until we eventually find Skid's agent out in the sticks. Skid's agent fears all is lost, and as he can't find Skid, he instead tasks Ratchet with bringing him the prize from the hoverboard races in Blackwater City. But we don't have those coordinates just yet, so we can do nothing but leave Skid's agent where he is, get any collectibles we can, head back to the ship, and blast off to Eudora, as for the first time in the game, we have no other choice on where to go. Now, every level we have played so far has been a certified banger. We're talking A tier or higher. However, our next planet, Eudora, is one of the only levels in the game I don't really care for. And the mental thing is, the level isn't even bad. For all intents and purposes, Eudora is simply a fine level with good music, a good aesthetic, and balanced enemies. However, since almost every other level in the game is simply better than good, this level tends to fall by the wayside as one of the more forgettable ones in the game. But not to worry, as even the most forgettable level in this game has something cool to show for it. This planet again has two paths. One big gauntlet of a path, absolutely littered with enemies, and then a much shorter platforming focused path. In most platformers, or even games generally, a shorter path which requires less effort will often not reward you with much, and certainly isn't the path used to progress the story at the end. This type of reward is usually reserved for the intense, combat-focused sections, but this level decides to have some fun and flip this trope on its head. You see, this long, intense, and honestly a little tiresome combat-focused path actually is completely optional and just leads to a cool weapon called the suck cannon. This weapon has no ammo and instead sucks up smaller enemies to fire them back out as high-powered projectiles, effectively giving conditionally infinite ammo. Now, back on the short platforming path, we will make our way over to the big, gruff henchman who is actually a complete coward and runs at the sight of Clank alone. Oh, and I'm sure Ratchet helped. On his way out, he drops an infobot out of his backside which advertises a space station which creates gadgets for Drek Industries. Ratchet thinks they should go and get those same gadgets and see if the scientists know where Drek is, but Clank thinks it would be a waste of time, and for the first time in this game, Ratchet snaps at his new friend.
You think too much. Come on, let's go.
I'm sure Ratchet's just having a long day and this isn't a precursor of things to come later in the game.
You are friendly, aren't you?
To you, yes. To him, no.
In any case, we have no other option but to head on to the base at Nebula G34. Nebula G34 is where you can buy the infamous Taunter, and actually, just to get this out of the way, in the previous level you could buy the Glove of Doom, and within the next level or two you can buy the Mind Glove. As previously said, I would not waste my bolts here. Now, in Nebula G34 we have three routes to take. One goes further into the base, One takes us to a Blarg battle cruiser, and another route informs us we can send Clank to explore the outside of the station, as Ratchet has no way of breathing in the vacuum of space. Yet. We're going to look at the first ever Clank section first, and let's just say the Clank levels only get progressively better from here on out because these are the most tedious and arguably weakest sections in the entire game. Fortunately, there are only 2 in the game, and this one doesn't outstay its welcome as much as the one we will play later. But what actually happens in a Clank level? Well, a lot of very slow walking, a little bit of punching, and it's mainly based around getting these little guys known as Gadgetobots to unlock different doors. To do this, you usually have to command them to defeat enemies that Clank himself can't defeat, and otherwise use them to solve basic puzzles. Honestly, these aren't terrible for their time, but as said previously, with the knowledge of how the Clank levels evolve into something far, far better, well, it's just a little difficult to enjoy them now. When I think about it, this is the only thing in this game that is the worst for the entire series, as I can't think of another game that has worse Clank sections. Maybe it's not simply the best game in this case. However, at the end of this route, Clank will be awarded with one of the more tedious gadgets for this game. Huh, go figure. This gadget is called the Hydro Displacer and is used to take and store large volumes of water to place somewhere else. It's an interesting little mechanic that is used sparingly throughout the game in small puzzle sections, but ultimately does break up the gameplay just a little too much for me. Once Clank is reunited with Ratchet and given him his new gadget, we can take a little trip in our favourite rocket ship over to the Blarg battle cruiser. This is a deceptively short section filled with enemies, including our first look at these crab creatures who are some of the most terrifying in the game. These guys instinctively attack towards you the moment they are hit, regardless of whether you are in reach or not. It's just plain creepy. Once you've dealt with them, you can choose whether or not to press this big, shiny red button. Who am I kidding about what if? No one's going to resist the shiny red button. It turns out that this button is in fact a self-destruct button with a 45-second timer for you to get out alive. And just in case you needed some inspiration, there is also an infobot hiding in the shuttle you arrived on. This section gets your adrenaline pumping, as when you first arrived, you had to run through several enemies, likely taking at least a couple of minutes to get through. So when you are given just 45 seconds to escape, it might just get your heart pumping. However, in reality, you can get back with time to spare, even with the enemies you have to defeat on the way. You escape the ship just as it explodes, and you'll be able to view the infobot, which will supply you with coordinates to the planet Rilgar, where the hoverboard race Skid's agent mentioned earlier is taking place. After sending Clank out into the vacuum of space and causing billions in property damage, we can finally get on with the main path of the level, and in my opinion, this is the first path I'd really consider a proper gauntlet. There are mutant frogs dropping from the ceiling and Blarg around every corner, as well as several of the mutant crabs we saw on the battle cruiser. Some of those aforementioned frogs even hide in boxes waiting for us to come close. It's honestly a really bleak and quite hollow feeling level. Once you fight your way through this gauntlet, you will have to fight what I can only assume is the mother of these crab mutants in the first boss fight of the series. And I won't lie, as a kid, I found this fight incredibly difficult, but now I actually enjoy getting a skill point for defeating this boss using only your base and melee weapon, the wrench. It's an okay boss fight, but out of the 4 in the game, this is certainly the weakest. With the mother mutant defeated, you can now speak to one of the scientists who, of course, will ask you for a fee in exchange for his
My soon-to-be patented grind boots.
The grind boots add a fun little break from the normal Ratchet gameplay for you to ride these rails, which get progressively more complicated throughout the game. This is one of the more fun side activities in this title and was so popular that they brought it back for almost every subsequent game in the series. With Nebula G34 all wrapped up, we can move on to arguably the most universally beloved level in this game, Blackwater City, Planet Rilgar. I didn't highlight this level earlier when speaking on atmosphere, graphics, and soundtrack, and that might just be considered criminal, as this level is phenomenal in all of these categories. From the moment you jump out of your ship, you are met with Blackwater City towering above you as the banging soundtrack begins to play, and I'd argue the feeling all of this imbues is panic. Regardless of which of the two routes you go down, you will be met with at least a couple of adrenaline pumping moments. In this playthrough, I chose to head down the path to the right first, which throws enemies upon enemies at you. The trope this time round is that these goo-like amoeboids have infested the city, and these robots and tanks have been sent to eradicate them, and anything else biological it seems, as Ratchet is also a prime target. Naturally, Ratchet works his way through both sides of this battle being the badass he is, eradicating both the amoeboids and robots on the outskirts of the city, jumping on a taxi and clearing downtown, and even clearing those being held in a detention center. Huh. Hey, Ratchet, I'm not sure you're allowed to do that. In downtown, Ratchet and Clank will also meet this shady dude who offers to swap Clank for a rhino.
What's a rhino, anyway?
Rip ya a new one.
What did you just say to me?
R-Y-N-O. Rip ya a new one.
Why, that's the most powerful missile launcher in the galaxy. I know it's worth a lot of bolts. He must have stolen it from the blarg.
Stolen? Look, trash can. Did I say anything about it being hot? You better watch your mouth or I'll...
Wait, don't tell me. Rip you a new one.
Since Clank isn't for sale, we'll have to pay this man in cold, hard bolts, and not just a few. Since this weapon is quite simply broken, it costs a whopping 150,000 bolts, which in this economy is 2 or 3 full playthroughs, or a cheeky glitch, which we will explore a little later in the video. With all the enemies defeated and an illegal arms dealer met, we finally make our way to the hoverboard races. You can enter these races to win a grand prize of a platinum zoomerator, which you can bring back to Skid's agent on Iridia to prove you won. The hoverboard races themselves are a pretty fun but simple affair. You are propelled forward automatically, so all you need to worry about is turning, jumping, and collecting boosts off of the floor. You pretty much need to be boosting 95% of the time, but after a couple of tries at the most, you should be able to learn the track well enough to come first. But let's not talk about the type of shit you need to be able to do to earn the skill point for beating this race in under 1 minute and 35 seconds, as that crap had me pulling my hair out when I first 100%ed this game. With the race out of the way and a brand new platinum zoomerator at your disposal, we can head on back to Skid's agent to show him the prize. He then tells you that he'll make you famous, which he doesn't, and tells him that his people will contact Ratchet's people.
Do you have people?
It turns out Ratchet does not have people, however Ratchet does receive a Sonic Summoner as a signing bonus. You see, in this game, you don't only receive handheld gadgets such as the Swing Shot and Trespasser, and boots like the Grime Boots received in Nebula G34. There are also 3 helmets to find throughout the game, and this one here is completely optional. This groovy looking helmet allows you to... Actually, I'm just gonna let the Gadgetron lady talk you through it.
The Sonic Summoner allows you to interact with the mysterious and intelligent sandmice species. Despite their innocent appearance, sandmice are very effective and aggressive hunters. Simply equip the Sonic Summoner when you are near a sandmouse house, and a mouse will emerge to greet you. If the mouse likes you, it may offer a bit of high-caliber tactical assistance.
Back on Rilgar, we can now take the route down the left into the Blackwater City sewers. You get an introduction to the Hydro Displacer mechanics, here with some mild puzzle gameplay. The true panic of the level comes when you slide down this sewer pipe. After pressing this button, water will start flooding this entire section of the sewer, and since Ratchet can't breathe underwater for all that long, you need to absolutely send it. I don't want to know how many times I died on this section as a kid. Even to this day, I dread it just a little bit, even though I have played it enough times to know how to get through it. And the way you get through it? Constantly spam long jump, as aside from a couple of sections, you never want to be just running. You need to be using that helipack as often as you can to prevent Ratchet from drowning. Once you get through that nightmare, you will finally be able to meet Captain Quark after you bribe his security guard for, wait, 4,000 bolts? What is this shit? Once you're in Captain Quark's rather minimalistically decorated trailer, he will inform you that he is aware of Drek's evil plot to destroy planets, but to accompany him in his heroics, you will have to prove yourself a hero by making your way through the defenses of his secret base on planet Umbris. Umbris is the first of very few levels in the entire game, featuring only one linear path. These levels are all massively combat orientated, with only very little platforming and puzzle gameplay littered in here and there. This level is chock full of bombs, machine guns, mines, and even some killer fish, and is probably the first significant difficulty increase in the game, especially as you still haven't been able to buy any of the real powerhouse weapons to help you out just yet. Once you have made your way to the center of Quark's base, well, I'll let Ratchet explain.
It's just something doesn't seem right.
This is it. Quark is going to help us stop Chairman Drek.
Why, thank you, Clank. You've been most helpful.
Indeed, Quark is actually working with Drek, as he is actually the worst and not actually that heroic. He is washed up and just out to make a quick buck by being the spokesperson for Drek's new planet. I mean, I'm not sure why anyone would really like him for this, as he is promoting destroying other planets, but whatever the reason is, he needs us dead. But of course, he isn't going to do it himself. He's going to throw us into our second boss of the game, the Blargian Snagglebeast. This boss fight is pretty trivial, with all of the Snagglebeast's attacks being incredibly telegraphed. However, once you beat him down to a certain amount of health, he will throw up a shield and start advancing on you. At this point, the game doesn't give any indication of what you need to do, but eventually you'll likely walk over one of these bridges, which can't support the Snagglebeast's weight, making him fall into the lava. You rinse and repeat this 3 times and he'll take a long, lava-y nap. It's at this point in the game where Ratchet goes a little off the rails. As said previously, this guy has an edge to him which does work in a game where you're running around mercilessly and indiscriminately killing anything that gets in your way. However, with Clank in cutscenes, he has always had a laugh, especially at Clank's newborn naivety, but after Clank leads them into this trap with Quark, Ratchet is pretty much a complete jerk to Clank for the next third, if not more, of the game. Some people say this is the reason for Ratchet's voice actor, Mikey Kelly, in this game being replaced by James Arnold Taylor for the rest of the series. However, I feel this is surely also down to the writing as much as the voice actor. I will point out a few times across the next few levels where Ratchet is just unnecessarily mean to Clank, who we need to remember was literally born yesterday and knows very little about the universe. The one thing he thought he knew was that Quark was a hero. Regardless, this was a great level with a great twist. It's just unfortunate how it impacts Ratchet's character for the next few levels. In any case, at the end of Umbris, we receive yet another infobot, the besieged planet of Batalia, as well as a new ship, so we now blast off with a disgruntled Ratchet, hell-bent on getting revenge on Quark, and a Clank who is silently still trying to save the universe from Drek. I'm not going to go into details in fear of repeating myself too much. Please be aware that this section of the game is the worst for the amount of backtracking you might need to do. If you do not complete as much of planets Batalia, Laspar, Auxon, and Pokitaru when you first get to each one exclusively in that order, you could end up bouncing between them significantly more than needed. As we have now reached Batalia, I can finally talk about weapons again, as we are introduced to the second of the 3, or arguably 4 weapons I believe are necessary to beat the game, and this is the Devastator rocket launcher. Outside of the Rhino and Visibomb gun, the Devastator is probably the best damage per shot weapon in the game, which is useful as the enemies here really do level up, such as Blarg that pop out from the ground only when you're not looking, or when you're occupied with a bolt crank, or these guys who attack super quickly, and of course, literal tanks. At the end of this main combat route, you will meet back up with the general from the infobot who you met at the beginning of the level. He commandeers your bravery with yet another infobot, this one for the toxic homeworld of Drek himself. Oh yeah, Drek. He appears a few times between levels, being a menace and adding several corporate titles to his name. First he's Chairman Drek, then Executive Chairman Drek, then Supreme Executive Chairman Drek. Like, dude, you're the head of the company. We get it. These cutscenes for the most part don't add a whole lot to the story, outside of reminding you that Drek exists, and is the main one you should be trying to defeat. But we aren't going to head over to Auxon just yet, as Batalia features the next evolution of the Grind Rail. This is one of the only Grind Rail sections we have had since we first got the gadget back on Nebula G34. And yeah, it's a great section which forces you to jump from Grind Rail to advance you along the set route and places mines along for just some extra danger. And at the end of this, you will meet one of the soldiers who deserted their post, who says one of the most real lines in the entire game.
I joined the army to get money to go to college. I never knew I'd end up in a war. Go figure.
Anyway, he offers you an infobot in exchange for a 2000 bolt bus pass, because of course he does, and we now have the coordinates for Gaspar, where we want to acquire a pilot's helmet for Ratchet. This is one of the scenes where Ratchet is also unnecessarily rude to Clank, as he mocks him for raising his hands when a soldier is pointing a gun at him. That's kind of an average reaction, Ratchet, I'm not going to lie. We now have the choice of Gaspar or Auxon, and although Auxon may seem like the more interesting choice as it is Drek's homeworld, we are indeed going to move on to Gaspar first because screw backtracking. Gaspar is one of those levels like Umbris where there is only one real route aside from a quick platforming section for a collectible, and it is simply littered with enemies. We see some ankle biter enemies and the return of the quick firing enemies from Battalia. However, we are also introduced to these self-destructing robot bombs who will descend on you from the moment any damage is dealt to them. As a kid, and even an adult, I found these enemies ridiculously annoying, as you often have several on you at once, and before I realized the bomb glove absolutely rips them a new one, I would consistently die to them. Once you work your way through the base here, you will retrieve the pilot's helmet and can head back to your ship. Unless you were to look over here to the side of this platform and notice a rather inviting hole in the ground. You see, I was lying about the single route, as there is actually a secret hidden gauntlet hidden underground here. This section isn't all that small either, and again is littered with enemies and walls of lava that damage you when touched. This again can be a significant challenge, especially when you consider you will likely be somewhat low on ammo as you have just ran through the main gauntlet just before this. The end of this brings you to a gold bolt collectible located just above your ship, and conveniently, a ton of ammo boxes. It's almost as if the devs knew you'd potentially be super low on ammo. Although Gaspar is a fun enough level in its own right, I do think this is the second level in the game after Eudora, which honestly kind of feels like filler. Don't get me wrong, I have fun playing it, but it's kinda wild this level was made simply to give Ratchet a helmet and nothing else. We can now move on to the Blarg homeworld of Auxon, and if there is ever a point in a playthrough where I say, nah, I'm done for the day, I'm not dealing with this shite, it is definitely our first of 2 visits to Auxon, as this is our second Clank level in the game. Just as Ratchet has no way of breathing in space as we saw back on Nebula G34, he also has no way of breathing the incredibly toxic air that has ousted most of the Blarg out into space with Drek to make their new planet by destroying others. Since Ratchet simply cannot breathe here, Clank has to go it alone, and honestly, props to Insomniac for making possibly the most unwelcoming level in the series. This place is desolate, and you really do feel like a tiny, weak robot here. This first part of the level takes you through one too many Gadgetbot puzzles, as by the final few doors we unlock, I am just praying that this will be the end. When our prayers are finally answered, we find ourselves some Magna Boots, which Ratchet can use to walk on certain metal surfaces, like the one we saw outside of the city back on Battalia. We can now head back to Ratchet and...
I'm tired, boss.
Yep, we are not done. This Clank section far outstays its welcome, as there are actually 2 Clank sections all rolled up into one. Right, Beard, compose yourself. Just get through this and no more Clank sections. At least, not of the tiny robot variety. This section is more interesting than the first, but arguably a lot more tedious. You have to lead several Gadgetbots rather than the normal 3 or 4 through sections being bombed, and small mazes with this electric bursting through it. If at any point one of these bots gets destroyed, you have to trek all the way back to its spawn point, but since all of them are identical, you don't know if it's the most recent spawn or the one right at the start of the section, so I'd recommend taking this one with the utmost caution. Once you reach the final section of this path, you will have to gather no less than 10 Gadgetbots to defeat several mutant creatures and to unlock the final area where we receive an infobot which Clank doesn't want to show Ratchet and which isn't shown to us initially either. Now that this frankly mind-numbing section has truly ended, we can head back to the ship where we see a frankly bipolar Ratchet go from somewhat joking around with Clank in one cutscene with the Magna Boots.
Hey! You giving me these or not?
They are magnetic. I appear to be stuck to them.
Oh.
to the pair bickering like an old married couple again in a scene which plays immediately afterwards, featuring the infobot which Clank didn't want Ratchet to see, as it shows a beach resort planet which Clank knew Ratchet would be distracted by. That lovely resort planet, which definitely has no mutant creatures due to toxic dumping by the Blarg, is going to have to wait, as we can take our newly acquired Magnaboots back to Batalia to sneak into the walled-off part of the city. After battling through a few enemies and tanks, we see our second appearance of the plumber who we met back on Novalis. It seems he's not allowed to let anyone who isn't a local use the defense turret he has fixed to defeat the Blarg warships, but he lets Ratchet use it as revenge against the Blarg for forcing him off of Novalis. This leads to an obligatory platformer turret section, which is short-lived and pretty fun. Once you've destroyed all the ships, the plumber awards you with the metal detector, which... Actually, why don't we let the Gadgetron lady take it away again?
Since you now own the metal detector, a bolt icon will show up on screen whenever you are near a buried stash of bolts. When equipped, the metal detector will give you signals to indicate your proximity to the buried bolts. The detector plate will always indicate the direction to the bolts. Hold down the circle button to activate the device. As you move closer to the bolts, the rings will become redder and the beeping will become faster.
I'm just going to add that this thing is useless and I never use it. Moving on. After finishing up Batalia, we can move on to the sunny resort planet of Pokitaru. And yes, I was lying, the Blarg did drop toxic waste into the sea, and now there are mutant squids and pufferfish everywhere. We are tasked with destroying the ships dumping the waste into the sea in exchange for the last O2 mask on the planet. This helmet is essential for returning to Auxon and several collectibles, as it would allow Ratchet to breathe in space, underwater, and in toxic environments. At this point in the game, you will have been able to buy a couple more weapons from the vendor, these being the Walloper, another melee weapon which simply isn't as good as the wrench, and the Decoy Glove, which throws out an inflatable Ratchet which distracts enemies for a brief time. I personally do not buy these weapons on a first playthrough, simply as the bolts you save can go towards more effective weapons, or some soon-to-be-seen health upgrades. However, one weapon will prove very useful in this level. You see, we need to escort the resort owner to a fighter jet on the other side of the island. Most of the time, this is relatively trivial, as you can distance yourself from the pufferfish mutants, which are actually called puffoids, who can quickly swarm you if you let your guard down. The real challenge here comes when you have to jump on these small boats to get you to the other parts of the island. You see, the puffoids jump out of the sea and onto the boats in droves, and honestly can overwhelm you as most of your weapons won't kill them in one hit, and you don't want to waste ammo from weapons like the Devastator here. However, I would like to call back to earlier in the game when we picked up a little weapon called the Suck Cannon for free on Eudora. You see, there is generally enough ammo for your other better weapons lying around that you may not find yourself using the Suck Cannon all that often, but it is absolutely worth picking up just for these two short boat sections here on Pokitaru, as you can suck 5 or 6 puffoids up at one time, instantly killing them, and when you fire them back out, they also one-hit any more puffoids on the attack. Once you get to the end of the level, you actually have to pay for a second upgrade for Clank, as the garage for the fighter jet is locked tight, and we need a new rocket-propelled thruster pack to access it. And conveniently, Big Al's brother is just across the way, ready to be paid for such an upgrade. Now that Clank has been filled to the brim with rocket fuel, we can now do a cool little move to unlock the garage, don our pilot's helmet from Gaspar, and take to the skies. The first of 3 sections featuring this fighter jet in the game is a relatively simple affair, and honestly feels rather clunky. The turning feels sluggish, and I find it best just to fly far away, then line yourself up for an attack on one of the 3 ships we need to destroy. Depending on how long you take to destroy the ships, you may get some smaller Blarg fighters attack you, but you can just boost away or take them out with ease. They're more of a mild annoyance than adding any real challenge. Since there are only 3 fighter jet sections in the game, these are mostly harmless, but are one of the weaker side activities. You may think we are done with Pokitaru now that we've saved the resort. However, just at the end of the pier where you landed your ship, there is a teleporter which will take you into the resort's sewers. Damn, this series really is obsessed with sewers. We've seen 3 so far this game. In this sewer, you will fight more of the amoeboids from Blackwater City and do some light platforming before meeting what appears to be the scientist back from Nebula G34. He tries to hypnotize you with his new gadget, which utterly fails. However, it does apparently trick the vendors to give you discounts on weapons. He says if you bring him some raritanium, he will give it to you. Finally, an NPC who doesn't want my bolts. However, since we don't have any raritanium, we'll have to come back to this later. After acquiring the pilot's helmet, O2 mask, and Magnaboots from Gaspar, Auxon, and Pokitaru, we can now head back to Auxon, which is just as unwelcoming as it was the first time. You land in the same area, but instead you now glide down to a section that Clank couldn't get to on his own. You fight through several mutant creatures and are then met with a split path, but before we choose where to go, we're going to head to the vendor and buy the third of our essential weapons to every Ratchet and Clank playthrough, the Visibomb gun. This weapon allows you to pilot remote control rockets from your location to anywhere in the entire level. Something that I've heard of in other retrospectives that I hadn't thought of before myself is how they made this weapon full well knowing that they would have to make sure that every single corner of every single level is perfectly made, as this weapon could find any tiny imperfection in any of them. Maybe Insomniac just knew they were making a simply perfect game, so they wanted to flex. Now, whatever path you choose, you are in for a real challenge, as both paths will throw enemy after enemy at you with little to no breathing room. You might think the scariest enemy in the level is this spiritual successor to the mutant crab from Nebula G34, but also work mechanically the same by attempting to attack the moment you hit them. However, the real scariest enemy are these birds, who usually are no threat, but on the Magnaboot ramps, when you're upside down and can only use your wrench, they threaten to one-shot you into oblivion, and it's terrifying. Since we're talking about it, let's continue down this path where you are chasing an infobot. After the Magnaboot section, you can be boring and stealth past these sleeping crabs, or just do this. Shortly after this, and many enemies later, you will catch up to the infobot, which shows Drek advertising his next planet-destroying weapon being made on the snowy planet of Hoven. Ratchet finally starts coming to his senses in this scene, but he still isn't quite over Clank's naivety with Quark.
Now this guy's gonna blow up an entire planet? That's just mean.
That's what I've been telling you.
Look, I'm still gunning for Quark. If we end up taking out Drek too, hey, fine. What?
You do care.
Don't push it, pal.
However, we are not ready to save any planets just yet, as there is another path for us to go down. This path, in my opinion, is far easier than the infobot section, with less crabs and more instances where you can pick them off from afar, but honestly, it's still a rather challenging section. You may be wondering why I've been encouraging you not to buy weapons that I don't consider essential for a first-time playthrough, and part of that reason is because this game is not a pushover. Up until this point in the game, you only have 4 hit points, and although health is relatively common, you don't find it around every corner, and let me tell you, this game does not get any easier from here on out. In fact, we are only 2 levels away from the next big difficulty increase, and for that, we need a health upgrade, or in my case, we need 2 health upgrades. At the end of this path, you will find a nanotech dispenser, nanotech being the name for health in the Ratchet series. This dispenser will give you 1 extra health for 4,000 bolts, and another 3, doubling your starting health for an additional 30,000 bolts. In my opinion, both of these are essential for having a somewhat comfortable final third of the game, but again, I am not your dad, so you do you. With our health hopefully doubled, we can move on to the snowy world of Hoven, which I don't ultimately think is filler, but it may just have one too many paths and feels a little long-winded, especially since we've just gone through several planets that didn't really advance the story. It feels like a single path gauntlet would have been a little more suited here. With that in mind, I'm not spending a whole bunch of time on Hoven. There is an icy platforming path which leads you to this eccentric gentleman who will give you some raritanium for fixing his drill, meaning we can go back and acquire the Persuader from the wannabe hypnotist on Pokitaru and get some tasty discounts on any new weapons. Secondly, there is a swimming-focused puzzle path at the end of which you can buy another upgrade for Clank, which allows us to swim faster underwater. It's pretty cruel from Insomniac to make us go for a long, slow swimming section just to reward us with the ability to swim quicker at the end of it. Pretty cruel indeed. Finally, the main path is our combat-focused section full of mines, Blarg soldiers, and helicopters, which all leads to a very exciting turret section. In all honesty, with the sheer amount of enemy helicopters thrown at you here, and the fact that this planet-destroying rocket is a bit of a bullet sponge, this turret section isn't quite as boring as you might think. Once you destroy the planet-destroying rocket, which fortunately doesn't destroy this planet when it falls into it, we are shown an infobot where Drek shows the next planet he is going to destroy and the base where he will be mounting his attack from. Ratchet and Clank both begin to bicker when ultimately they are actually both wanting to get to the same destination.
We must get to the moon base and stop Drek.
No, we have to get to the moon base to find Quark. If Drek is there, Quark is probably with him.
But Drek is going to destroy that city. We must get to the base.
That's what I said.
No, that is what I said.
Fine.
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 After our pair somewhat agree on where they are going, we can move on to my personal favourite level in this entire game, Gemlik Base. For those watching who have played this game, you may think this is an odd pick for a favourite level. It's one of those completely linear levels, one path, loads of enemies, and some very light platforming and puzzle solving, and ends with a relatively tedious boss fight. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't necessarily work to some of the strengths spoken about earlier on that we see in levels such as Blackwater City and Metropolis. I just can't help but love this level. The level design, coupled with the fantastic music, honestly gives me that feeling of being caught in a hostile environment in the bleak, silent vastness of space. Maybe that's why I like it so much. Not from a gameplay perspective, although it's a fair challenge being presented to you. It's a love for how this level makes me feel. Damn. We got a little deep there. Let's go kick Quark's ass to make us feel better. The boss fight against Captain Quark here is both pretty awesome and also a little disappointing from a gameplay perspective at the same time. It's awesome because it's a big airborne battle with you in a fighter jet against Quark in a big warship where you fight over the very level you just worked your way through. It's a little disappointing for the exact same reason. It's a ship fight, with the build-up for this fight being raised in almost every cutscene since Quark betrayed us. You best believe that I wanted to fight him face to face, but instead, he's just throwing missile after missile and mine after mine at us from the aforementioned warship. Fortunately, there is quite a lot of talk from Quark throughout the fight, especially as he begins to realise that you're going to beat him and effectively starts begging for his life.
Hey, Ratchet, buddy, old pal. Why don't we just call it a day? Let bygones be bygones. You hear me there, Chief? Look, I'm always...
Before his ship violently spirals into a flaming inferno, crashing into the planet below. I'm sure we won't be seeing him again. Once our pair have landed, Ratchet finally starts coming to his senses after defeating Quark and seeing the true damage that Drek has been dealing across the galaxy in another infobot, and to be fair to him, he apologizes.
Yes, I know. It is worse than I expected, too.
Look, maybe you were right. This is a lot bigger than you or me. I was really selfish focusing on Quark.
It is not too late to stop Drek.
Hey, yeah! We've got this new ship. Let's go get him!
Now you are talking.
With our pair's relationship mostly made up, we can head back down to do whatever we can to stop any further destruction to the planet below. Altanis is a rather unique level as due to the wild electrical storms, Clank can't risk leaving the ship, leaving us with our extended platforming moves for the first time since the third level in the game. It's also the final level in the game where we see a significant difficulty increase, so if you haven't already, you should really go back to Auxon and get those health upgrades. Similarly to Hoven, I'm going to have to be a little more brief in my analysis here, as Altanis actually has 4 paths for us to take. Amazingly, 3 of these are completely optional, with only the main combat-focused path needed to progress to the following level. I feel like this path feels a bit longer than it realistically is due to the sheer amount of these robot enemies that get thrown at you. Their attacks are incredibly difficult to dodge at times as they sweep electric across the floor. I sometimes find it's actually easier to get up close and personal with the wrench rather than picking them off from a distance. This is especially true for these enemies as when you back up, they will pop back into their holes, meaning you can't just use the Visibomb to sort them out. And I'll be honest, at this point in the game, I really do begin to rely on that weapon a bunch. After a brief grind rail segment where these enemies follow you along the rail, we find ourselves talking with a rather zany shop owner who is willing to sell us just about any of his broken produce or our next infobot. This infobot actually gives us the coordinates for the planet Clank was created on, as seen at the very start of the game. We are finally coming full circle. But before we can come full circle and head on to Quartu, we need to go down our aforementioned optional paths. The path which a taxi takes you to is kind of half platforming and half stealth-ish, as these flying robots with spotlights will alert ground turrets. Although you can work your way through stealthily, it isn't the most difficult section to fight through outside of this room here. Yeah, this I would recommend stealthing through. At the end of this path, you will be rewarded with another free weapon, which also has infinite ammo. Huh. If I had a bolt for every time that's happened in this game, I'd have 2 bolts, but it's weird that it happened twice. The Morpho Ray is the first of a long-running gimmick in the Ratchet series of morphing your enemies into various animals. In this game's case, the Morpho Ray will turn enemies into chickens, and honestly, its range is incredibly short, and outside of using it for a laugh, you likely won't find much use for it at all. However, these weapons do get far more effective the further you go in the series. I love the one from Nexus, but it's a humble, comedic start here. Our next optional path leads us down some icy platforming, incorporating wind into the mix this time round, and without Clank, this can get pretty challenging. Once you reach the end of this path, you'll find, oh, hell no, I saw your ship burning to flames, fall through a planet's atmosphere, and then explode on the surface. What do you mean you're alive? Oh right, yeah, forgot about that. I guess you can just survive this shit in this universe. Anyway, Quark is indeed alive, and since we beat his ass in orbit and he has been relegated to a measly Gadgetron salesman on a desolate planet, well, Ratchet just doesn't seem to care anymore. He's even joking around with Quark. It really makes you feel bad for Clank, considering how much of a dick Ratchet was being earlier in the game. Quark will offer to sell you a Gadgetron PDA,
Public display of affection?
a gadget which allows you to buy ammo for your weapons at any point in a level at an incredibly marked up price. This gadget can be useful if you find yourself in a situation where you're low on health and low on ammo, but if I'm being honest, I almost never find myself in need of it. But hey, if you're a badass who didn't buy the health upgrades back on Auxon, maybe this will be useful for you. Having completed all 3 of these paths, upon returning to the little hub where all the paths split off from, there will be a small cutscene that will play where a Blarg bomber will destroy a little statue with a hidden switch underneath. This switch will activate some swingshot targets nearby. This swingshot section is short-lived, but is an absolutely awesome test of your swingshot skills, as you will have to swing from several targets with nothing but the abyss below, and then constantly hang on to these separate targets before falling off at the right moment, which in the end rewards you with a gold bolt. I feel like this was Insomniac rewarding the player for choosing to play out the 2 optional paths, as this level could be really short-lived if you chose to only play the path that continues the story. Let's move on to Quartu now, as after saying I wouldn't spend too long on Altanis, I ended up writing close to 1,000 words for it. And speaking of things that are far too long, I did just want to take a moment for those who have made it this far into the video to say a really heartfelt thank you. If I stick to my schedule of uploads, this will only be my 2nd ever upload on the channel, so please know that I appreciate any support received more than you could possibly know. With that being said, please like the video if you're enjoying it, and let me know your favourite or least favourite thing about this game in the comments, or if you disagree with me on anything, as I'd love to hear about that too. And of course, subscribe for future videos on both Spyro and Ratchet, and many more games in the future. Right, now, actually onto Quartu. After we land and before we move off down the main path, we'll see a ladder off to the left. This leads to a timed swimming section, which is the first time you really see the benefits of Clank's Hydro Pack, which we got back on Hoven. After we race through the water dodging all the obstacles in our way, we will receive an awesome little item called the Bolt Grabber. This gadget widens the pickup range for bolts close by, and honestly, I just wish you got this earlier in the game, as prior to this, the pickup range wasn't much better than the pickup range for gems in the Spyro games. After we attach the bolt grabber to our utility belt, we can head back down the main path where we find one of the robots from the first cutscene of Clank's escape guarding the entrance to the very factory Clank was made in. However, even after defeating this robot, we won't be able to enter the factory as we don't have the gadget required to trick the robot behind the force field into letting us in. This of course means we'll have to backtrack a little bit. I'm not going to complain about this again, my feelings are known. We can instead move down this path to the left, taking out some enemies as we go until we find this quirky little scientist. He created the massive mechs seen in the infobot for this planet without realizing what Drek would be using them for, and is now trying to destroy the machine that made them. But he needs protection whilst he does this, so Clank volunteers to be enlarged to distract any mechs from stopping the scientist. And here we have the third and final Clank section of the game, but this time round it's a little bit different. Clank is now the size of a building, can punch through mechs and helicopters with ease, fire rockets from his wrists, and let out a devastating ultimate attack. This was jaw-dropping to see for the first time as a kid, and is always a fun time, even now, just blasting through all these enemies who have zero hope of beating you. You also get a good few thousand bolts during this, and if you really needed to, you can farm this over and over for extra bolts, as the scientist makes his machine only work with Clank's circuitry, specifically going forward. The scientist will also give us an infobot containing an ad for the new Gadgetron Hologuise, which, you guessed it, will allow us to enter the factory disguised as a dainty version of one of the big robots we saw earlier in the level. This is located at the Gadgetron HQ on Kalibo 3, so this is where we'll blast off to next. The Gadgetron HQ is an interesting level on two accounts. Along one path, we have the final evolution of brine booting in this game. It's somewhat challenging, but nothing you likely won't complete after a couple of tries. The really interesting part is when you get to the end of this section. You see, throughout the entire game, you've had someone from Gadgetron whispering in your ear different tips and tricks on things you find throughout the galaxy, such as the tutorials we saw earlier for the Sonic Summoner and Metal Detector. Well, at the end of this section, you actually get to meet the person who has been helping you. I think it's just a really cool way of expanding your universe, as so many games have these types of help messages, but many of them don't explain where they come from, and ultimately, they shouldn't have to. But I just think it's awesome that Insomniac said, hey, why don't we actually have an in-game reason for all this happening? She also gives us the Map-O-Matic, which allows us to see where secret areas with collectibles are, and that's pretty cool. Along the main path of the level, you are met with some of the more difficult enemies in the game, such as these Blarg Commandos. Some of the most difficult enemies in both the first Spyro and Ratchet game are commandos. Is that lazy or is that an Easter egg? Let's be positive. Let's say it's an Easter egg. These Blarg hover in the air, and once you hit them, they will immediately shoot back with laser accuracy. Now this is absolutely fine for difficulty scaling, as we only have 2.5 more levels after this. However, one thing that is just a tad much, and is more prevalent in the final level than it is here, is the fact that no matter where you are, once they are alerted to your presence, they will fire on you. This means that if I use the Visibomb from behind cover and these guys are alerted, they will fire down on me without remorse, even if I am so far away they haven't even loaded in for me. In any case, once you have made your way through all the Blarg Commandos and the sections where you are locked in a room with Gadgetron bots testing weaponry, you will find your way into the office of the Gadgetron CEO. This leads to a really funny scene where Ratchet and Clank try to warn the CEO about the invasion, but the CEO is just kind of like, we're a weapons manufacturer, so I think we're all good. However, he does agree to give us a Hologuise if we can beat the hoverboard course on this planet and become his next... I'll just let him explain it again.
I am in search of a hip young star to represent my newest line of boards. Someone the kids can look up to.
And I am your man.
If you can beat my test bots in a race, that job is yours.
This race is similar to the first, except this time you can use a Devastator to destroy your opponents along the way, which isn't really fair, but hey ho. You can also use the prize from the first race to gain extra boost by doing tricks, which again isn't really fair, but again, hey ho. After the race, you are employed by the CEO and are promised an employment discount, which will start after you've been with the company for 2 years. I wonder if we'll ever get any use out of that. With the hologuys in our pocket, we can head back to Quartu and really get the final stages of the game rolling as we head into the factory. This factory section is the first of two like it in this final section of the game. You have to use the hologuys in increasingly difficult situations to trick the bots into letting you through different barriers and then defeat them before they can hit one of these red buttons, which activates a defense that will very likely kill you. Aside from walking in the hologuys being about as slow as a Clank section, I really do love how Insomniac up the ante here. There is very little room for mistakes, and you have to strike hard and fast, and usually up close and personal, to prevent any bot from getting near the aforementioned buttons. You also see different parts of massive mechs being built here, which brings some real weight to the story, as you have seen previous planets like Altanis that were likely ravaged by mechs just like these ones. At the end of this long old trek through the factory, you will actually meet Clank's mother, a seemingly sentient AI who made Clank different from the other robots in the factory so that he could defeat Drek. At least that's the canon for now. Considering this is just reading text off a blank screen, this is actually one of the most emotional scenes of the PS2 games, and you have to really commend Insomniac, as honestly, you might not realize how emotionally attached you are to our titular duo until around this point in the game. Sure, we've laughed at their jokes, but this is where we really see their character arcs for the game start to come to a close. After drying our tears, we can head back to our ship and onto Drek's fleet. You can move straight on through the fleet, however I always like to jump in the water surrounding our ship first, which leads us to another timed swimming section, with our prize at the end being this code bot, which can be used to open a door back on Quartu, which gives us a gold bolt and tons of bolts to boost us for any final bits we want to buy before the end of the game. You might think it's weird that this is a one-off thing to find, and you'd be correct, as this was meant to be an item or gadget that would be used throughout the game that ended up being cut. It's still cool as a thing to just see in the game though. Content is content after all. For the main section where you teleport from ship to ship throughout the fleet, well, I don't have a whole bunch to say on this section, as honestly, it's mostly just more of the same stealth segments from the factory on Quartu, except maybe slightly harder as you have less time to clear out the enemies. If you've brought the phenomenal Tesla claw from the vendor at this point, you can just do this. There is also a fighter jet segment as you need to stop these cannons from shooting into the magna boot path on the outside of the ship. This is kind of like the swimming section at the start of the level. Content is content. Like, I enjoy playing this, but it seems a bit out of place level design wise. Soon after this, we reach the end of the level and Drek's office. And yeah, he isn't there. But of course, an infobot is. This infobot is the final one in the game, and it shows Drek talking about an insignificant planet having the perfect orbit for his new world. And of course, to make things just that bit more personal for Ratchet, it's his home. We are indeed coming full circle as our final level brings us back to the very beginning to save Veldin. We fly back to Veldin and land right outside Ratchet's garage and start the level in the exact same position as we did right at the start of the game. Except this time, instead of feeling intrigued with the concept of potential adventure, all the game makes you feel is dread. From the music to the level being set at dusk with a burnt orange sky and seeing Blarg commandos in the distance, all I want to do is run away, but alas, we have a planet to save and a game to finish. We've spoken about several different gauntlet paths and levels throughout the game, but nothing, and I mean nothing, will prepare you for this. Even going into this level having played it at least 50 times, if not more, in my life, having got max health and all my favourite weapons, I still feel nervous. You fight commando after commando, tank after tank, dropship after dropship, and you best believe that you will run out of ammo on some of your more crutch weapons. Aside from being easily the most difficult combat path in the game, the level also forces you to use almost every gadget in your entire arsenal. There are small grind boot and magna boot paths, you have to use the swing shot, the trespasser, and the hydro displacer, and even right at the end of the level, where you are met with no less than an entire army, you have to transform into Giant Clank and fight your way through it. This is everything a final level should be. It should force you to make you use every skill you have learnt throughout the game, and it should have an epic final boss fight. This boss fight, of course, comes in the form of Ultimate Supreme Executive Chairman Drek in a giant mech suit. Initially, the game tricks you into thinking this will be a giant Clank fight, but that would not be good enough. This is Ratchet's turf, and naturally, he will be getting the final blow. So after a few quick punches, Drek uses his mech to shrink Clank down to size before moving on to another arena. After loading up on ammo at a conveniently placed vendor, we can chase after Drek. His attacks are fairly common tropes for 3D platformers, firing out mines, rockets, and bombs which shockwave across the floor. If you stay on the move and always stay attacking with weapons like the blaster and or Tesla Claw, you will likely get through this section with only a couple of hit points of damage being taken. He retreats to another arena which is much the same as the first, but this is why it is so important to have gotten the health upgrades earlier on, as otherwise it can be so easy to be only on 1 or 2 hit points for the upcoming far more difficult final phase. Now, before we move on to this final phase of the fight, I need to mention how throughout your entire playtime, the game has been feeding you this dry, consumeristic satire by taking your bolts to progress the game, having many of the infobots actually be adverts for different products in the galaxy, and of course, having characters such as Captain Quark being washed up and just needing to make a quick buck. And to really bring all of this even more full circle, this consumeristic satirical greed is shown no more perfectly than when Drek reveals the true reason he's been destroying planets and building a new world. This happens mid-boss fight, no less.
So it has come to this. Once I step on this ignition switch, a countdown will commence. The end of which signals the destruction of your pitiful world.
There must be another way to make a home for your people.
You think that's what this is about? Who do you think polluted our last world? I did. This is about one thing and one thing only. Cash, and lots of it. You see, I've been paid for every square inch of my new world. Once the inhabitants move in, I will begin polluting this world as well. Then the whole thing starts all over again. Ah, brilliant.
Why, you evil little...
Save it, Clank. We have to stop that timer.
With that truly evil plan revealed, it is time for our final battle. In this final stage of the fight, Drek will intermittently start the timer for his planet-destroying weapon, the aptly named Deplanetizer, and you will then have to race to the middle of the arena to stop it. And just to make this fight even more exhilarating, every time Drek starts the timer, you will have less time to stop it. Drek also brings out all of his punches here. He advances on you every time you flip the switch, sends out rogue Gadgetobots, a mess of heat-seeking missiles, and this devastating laser attack from afar, which can be a bastard to dodge. Eventually, after all your ammo is depleted, you send Drek flying up onto his own newly constructed planet, and the Deplanetizer nicely flips over from aiming at Veldin to aiming at that manufactured world. Of course, Ratchet and Clank are responsible heroes who are aware that billions have been displaced by their planets being destroyed by Drek, and this new planet could be used to house them, and they wouldn't possibly be so petty as to use the Deplanetizer just for the sake of it.
You know, this time I am thinking what you're thinking.
Oh, with Drek defeated, his planet destroyed, and billions homeless, Ratchet and Clank have a brush with death which leaves Clank with a broken arm. I could hyperanalyze this final scene, but honestly, it speaks for itself.
That was close. Thanks.
My arm appears to be badly damaged.
Ah, you'll be all right. Hey, Tin Can! Where do you think you're going? We, still need to fix that arm.
And with that heartfelt ending, this duo has been inseparable for 24 years and counting. But if you're thinking this video is over and this is the outro, well, you would be wrong, as we have one last section to go over: collectibles, New Game Plus, and general 100% completion. I've mentioned gold bolts at a few different points throughout this video, but I want to highlight a few of the ones we have to backtrack for that I think were particularly well thought out by Insomniac. First of all, we have to head back onto Novalis right at the start of the game. When you first visited, you wouldn't have been able to swim up the current of the river, but with Clank's Hydro Pack, this is easy work. Once you reach the end of the water section, you'll have to clear out a small army of amoeboids before making your way to the gold bolt. Similarly, on Rilgar, if you make your way back to the sewers, you'll notice that they're still flooded from earlier in the game. As you now have the O2 mask, you can now swim down a secret section leading to a gold bolt. Finally, one of my favorite gold bolts is this gold bolt on Auxon, hidden up in the second half of the Clank section of the level. Well, that's where it starts, at least. You see, you have to use the Visibomb to break several barriers down, making a tunnel all the way into one of the paths on Ratchet's side of the level. You can then work your way up the tunnel to get your collectible. Be careful though, as breaking down each barrier can get super finicky as the tunnel turns at pretty tight angles. I just love how these types of collectibles get you to use the environment to your advantage in ways you simply couldn't on your first round trip. I know I have said how much I dislike backtracking, but I do want to say that I dislike backtracking in regards to the main story of a game, not going back to find hidden collectibles. As well as collecting every gold bolt in the game, we also have 30 skill points to obtain. These are little hidden objectives that there are one or two of in most levels. Some of these skill points are rather trivial, such as shooting a few ships out of the sky on Novalis, or gliding down to stand on top of Owl's RoboShack in Metropolis. However, some of them are just a tad cruel, such as beating the Blackwater City hoverboard race in under 1 minute and 36 seconds, as mentioned earlier, and working your way through the whole combat path of Battalia only using a sand mouse from the Sonic Summoner. I tend to save most of the gold bolts and skill points to clean up at the end of the game, but since this video is too long already, we will not be going through all of them here. Now, before going on to New Game Plus, you'll need approximately 450,000 bolts. You could play multiple playthroughs, but I simply did not have the time for this, so instead we're going to glitch onto the hoverboard track on Blackwater City, grab the Taunter, and do a bit of this. You see, the boxes above you here respawn the second they are off screen, but since they are always off screen here, well, you can see how the glitch works. Anyway, leave Ratchet here for a good few hours, and eventually, oh look, there they all are. Since we're in Blackwater City, we can go back to the shady salesman and buy the Rhino for 150,000 bolts and start ripping every enemy a new one. Once we enter New Game Plus, we need to get to Novalis, where there will be a teleporter that wasn't there at the beginning of our first playthrough. This will take us to a room where we can buy upgraded gold versions of most of our weapons, or, you guessed it, all of our gold bolts and the extra 250,000 that we have on top of the Rhino funds. It's a great way to add some replayability, as outside of doing skill points and collecting gold bolts, if you haven't already, there isn't a whole bunch to do in New Game Plus, so having access to an improved arsenal with extra abilities is great. Once you've unlocked all the skill points, gold bolts, and gold weapons, you will gain access to the extras menu, which contains concept art as well as magazine covers showing what some of the characters have been doing in the wake of Drek's defeat. As you will hear in many videos in the future, I am a sucker for this type of stuff. I love looking at concept art to see the original ideas the developers and game designers had for different characters and levels, and I absolutely love when a game expands its lore through these mini pieces of extended media. As we approach the 15,000 word mark for my script, that is about all I have to say on this first game in the Ratchet series, and my favourite game of all time. Although it can feel a little clunky at times, especially compared to its sequels, I just feel that this is what makes it so charming and full of life. Considering this game had no real writer, its story is amazing. Its gameplay, although a little dated, is still tremendously fun to play, and the game is just sublime to look at. This series rarely drops the ball going forward. I am yet to see a Ratchet and Clank game that beats out this one for me, and considering at this point we're getting like one game a generation, if we're lucky, and how blinded by nostalgia I am for this game, I doubt any other Ratchet game will ever beat this very first title, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way because this game is simply the best. If there is any soul who made it to the end of this video, which I'm estimating to be close to 90 minutes long, all I can say is thank you so much for watching. I've wanted to write these types of long form videos for a long time, and recently just had the courage and the oomph to just go for it. With that being said, I know my recording and editing are likely not perfect, so as well as letting me know your thoughts on this game in the comments, do let me know if you have any constructive criticism for me on how my videos are made. Of course, drop a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more long-form videos, and follow me on all the social links on my channel to see some more short-form videos. With all that being said, I hope to see you in the next Ratchet video, where we will be going ridiculously in depth on Ratchet and Clank 2, Locked and Loaded. All for my friends across the pond, Ratchet and Clank 2, Going Commando. Why do you guys always get the cool titles?